Hey guys, Stephanie with AmericanMuscle.com here with my review of the K&N Series cold air intake that is available for the 2015 and up V6 Mustang. The K&N cold air intake is going to be for the S550 V6 owners out there who are looking for one of the most basic and affordable cold air intakes that doesn't necessarily require a computer retune. A cold air intake is oftentimes one of the first mods for many Mustang owners, but there are a handful of different options out there and factors to consider like open element or closed airbox. The K&N Series is one of the more simple options that are available out there right now, and they're also one of the most affordable. So usually anyone installing a cold air intake is looking for gains, and so let's start by breaking the numbers down first before getting into the intake. We already ran a baseline run and got some numbers in the book, so we're going to run the car again with the K&N installed. Now we did pair a 93 octane Bamba performance tune with the intake, even though the intake does not require a tune, but we wanted to see the full potential that the intake has. A cold air intake by itself will only net a few horsepower at the end of the day, and we're talking single digits here, so even if an aftermarket intake does not necessarily require a tune, we always recommend a tune if you're looking for any gains or improvements from your Mustang. Our baseline run with our 2015 V6 gave us numbers of 241 horsepower and 235 foot-pounds of torque at the rear wheels. With the K&N intake and the 93 octane Bamba performance tune, the car made 256 horsepower and 246 foot-pounds of torque, making for a peak gain of 15 horsepower and 11 foot-pounds of torque. Now keep in mind that we did pair the intake with a tune, so a lot of these gains could definitely be attributed to that tune. And I always say this, but peak gains are nice to know, but the real thing to look for is going to be differences throughout the curve or in your driving RPMs, which is what you're actually going to notice performance-wise when you're driving. And throughout the curve, we're seeing gains of 17 horsepower in the 6,000 RPM range and 18 foot-pounds of torque right in the 3,600 RPM range. The low-end torque gain is something that you're going to notice more than the high-end power gain, and that's what's going to make the car more fun to drive. Now, like I just said, keep in mind that a lot of the gains that we're seeing here are due to the tune that we paired with the intake. If we take a closer look at the K&N itself, I'm going to point out some things. First of all, the main benefit or desire of a cold air intake is increasing airflow to the engine and providing improvements in power and acceleration over the restrictive stock airbox. This usually means a larger filter and a larger air tube. What you tend to see though, especially in more budget-friendly options like the K&N here, are intake tubes and filters that are not as large as some of the other options that are out there, so you can't expect as much performance out of an intake like this one here, and that is something that we definitely saw in the Dyno, especially with how well the factory intake setup works in the S550s. All of the gains that we saw in the Dyno were from that Bamba tune. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to say that as with any aftermarket cold air intake, but especially with this particular intake, you will see the best results in terms of power and acceleration when you pair it with a tune, even though this is technically a no tune required intake, which means that you can just bolt this thing up and go without adding a custom tuner. So speaking of price, like I just mentioned, this is one of the more budget-friendly options out there, and it's going to cost under $300, and there are currently not many options out there that are in that price range. The K&N filter is a reusable filter that's washable and reusable after it's oiled. The filter has a unique layer design that has layers of treated cotton gauze that is sandwiched between two epoxy-coated aluminum wire screens. This construction adds durability, and the oil that is used on the filter gives the cotton gauze a tackiness that acts as a powerful filtering agent. K&N uses the oil in the filter to give some added engine protection, which is important from an open element cold air intake. The intake has a roto-molded plastic construction throughout, including the intake tube for smooth air delivery to the engine. And speaking of the intake tube, I kind of hit on this before, but this is one of the smaller intake tube and filter combos for the S550 V6. This intake is an open element intake, meaning it comes with this shield here, not an enclosed airbox. It also eliminates the factory cold air feed from the grill on the driver's side and goes with a more basic and classic cold air intake design. If you're looking for the largest power gains or an enclosed type of airbox, or even to keep the factory cold air duct in use, there are other options on the site that might suit you better than this one here. And like I mentioned earlier, this particular intake does not require a tune, which means that you can just bolt it on and go if you want to, but if you're looking for gains and improvements in drivability, then just know that any improvements that you'll see from the intake can be greatly amplified by running a tune, just as a side note. As for the install, it's nothing too difficult, and the intake will come with all of the items that you'll need, including the clamps, couplers, and hardware. All you really need to complete the install is a 10mm, a flathead for the plastic pins, and some pliers to remove the hose clamps. This is probably one of the easier mods that you can tackle with your new Mustang, and will probably take about a half hour or an hour tops, and I'm going to call it a 1 out of 3 wrenches on our scale. Disconnect the breather hoses from the inlet tube, remove the 10mm bolt on the airbox that holds it to the inner fender, and detach the airbox from the lower inlet tube on the side of the rad as you take out the airbox. Loosen the clamps on the inlet tube at the throttle body and the airbox, and then remove the inlet tube. Next, install the lower heat shield bracket that is provided onto the fender. Install the filter adapter onto the heat shield and secure it with the provided hardware. Place the spacer between the bracket and the heat shield and install the other heat shield bracket with the provided hardware. Install the K&N filter onto the adapter and tighten down the clamp. Install the edge trim onto the heat shield, and then you're ready to install the heat shield into the car to the lower bracket. Install the hump coupler onto the throttle body and slide the two clamps over it. Next, install the coupler onto the air filter and slide the clamps over it, making sure to tighten down the clamp over the air filter. The coupler and clamp should be on the engine side of the air shield, just to clarify. Next, you're going to install the quick disconnect fitting onto the K&N intake tube. And then it's just a matter of positioning the cold air tube and tightening down all of the clamps and connecting the vent lines to the disconnect fittings. Wrapping things up here, I think the K&N Series Typhoon cold air intake is a good option for the V6 owners out there that are on a budget but that want to start modding their car. It looks good under the hood and has a reusable air filter, and the intake does not require a tune. You can check this intake out online more for yourself, and for all things Mustang, keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.